Okay. Welcome to the book launch for Lived Resistance Against the War on Palestinian Children. My name is Syksy Räsänen. I am the chair of the Israeli Committee Against House Demolitions Finland, vice chair of SUMUD, the Finnish Palestine Network, also a senior researcher at the University of Helsinki, although not on this important and interesting topic that we are discussing today. So I have the pleasure of hosting this event. I'll introduce our guests in due time. I'll just mention the first bit about the safer space principles and the schedule. So in this event we follow the safer space principles. So we welcome criticism, critical questions, critical discussion, but please let us be respectful of each other even when we disagree. And there is also a chat, so you can also leave questions in the chat. And I will be monitoring them from here. And we'll take audience questions at the end. So the schedule is that we will start with Heidi Morrison, who is an associate professor of history at the University of Wisconsin-La Crosse, United States, specializing in the modern Middle East, global history of childhood, and oral history. She is the author of Childhood and Colonial Modernity in Egypt, editor of Global History of Childhood Reader, and co-general editor of A Cultural History of Youth. So she will first start with a half-an-hour presentation. She's the editor of the book Lived Resistance Against the War on Palestinian Children, which, by the way, you have an opportunity of buying. There are some books there on the stand if you want to have a look. And there will also be a book signing at the end. We are followed by Nitin Sawhney, professor of practice at the Aalto University, leader of the Critical AI and Crisis Interrogatives Research Group at the Department of Computer Science. And he has also conducted participatory media programs and psychosocial research with marginalized youth, and done documentaries in Gaza and Guatemala. And as the third participant, we'll have the Palestinian journalist, marking strategist, and activist, Randa Al-Dawoudi. Please
join us.
Come on stage. Thank you, Randa.
It's okay.
Who is originally from Barka, now ethnically cleansed, an ethnically cleansed village. Randa has lived in Gaza almost her entire childhood and has experienced 3 major Israeli assaults throughout her childhood in Gaza. And she will provide commentary after Heidi, who will speak about the book, Nitin, who will talk about his research and his work reported in the book. And after that, we'll have a panel, and then after that, audience discussions. So I hope you have a pleasant and interesting evening, and Heidi, please go ahead.
I need to go up here, right? Yeah. This. Hi, I'm just making sure I got this. Okay. Thank you so much for coming, and thank you, Nitin, for inviting me and all the other panelists, and thank you to the Think Center for hosting us here. I used to live in Finland. I lived here for 2 years. I was based at Tampere, University of Tampere, as a researcher, and it's wonderful to be back. And before I get started, I do want to indicate that the book is for sale on the back, and you're welcome. If you need to leave early, you can buy it. There's a QR code there. And all the proceeds from the book go to the Gaza Scholar Fund to help rebuild academia in Gaza, because there's been a scholasticide there. And the book is only $20. And again, all the proceeds go to the Gaza Scholar Fund. So please just use the QR code to take a copy. All right, let's get started. Thank you for coming once again. Okay, I want to begin by, before I get into the book, I want to situate myself a little bit and acknowledge that if I were a Palestinian, I would certainly hope that an American, which I am, would begin by acknowledging the complicity of my own government in what's going on in Palestine and what has been going on. So I'm going to start with a bit bigger view, and before I narrow down into the book itself. So the larger backdrop of this talk is about Palestinian children, is the 20th and 21st century historical phenomena of adults conducting wars against children. And the numbers speak for themselves. As the world historian Peter Stearns writes, as I wrote up here, it's been estimated that about 150 million children have been killed in wars around the world since the 1970s. And another 150 million children crippled and maimed. That's as if every North American child born in this same time period since the 1970s had been either killed or injured. The numbers are staggering. According to UNICEF, right now, about 1 in 5 children are living or fleeing from conflict zones. That is about 400 million children today, living or fleeing from conflict zones. So when we talk about Palestinian children, they are, in a very real sense of the word, the canaries in the coal mine for children of war everywhere. And we cannot say that we do not know what is happening in Palestine. The entire world is watching, observing what is clearly war crimes being committed upon war crimes by Israel. The International Court of Justice, the ICJ, has launched 2 recent advisory opinions on the matter. The first was last January, stating that Israel is committing plausible genocide with irreparable damage. The second ICJ warning was just a few months ago in July, stating that Israel's decades-long occupation and annexation of Palestinian territory is unlawful, featuring a structure of racial domination, which Archbishop Desmond Tutu has hearkened to apartheid. Both opinions from the ICJ have called for the halting and transfer of sales of weapons and arms to Israel. On top of that, the recent UN General Assembly just a few weeks ago made a landslide vote that demands Israel withdraw from the West Bank and Gaza in 12 months. And that's, again, in accordance with the ICJ's opinion. And that vote by the UN General Assembly follows decades of consistent resolutions by the UN relating to decades of Israeli illegal expansionism. And yet, despite Israel's countless violations to international law, all we hear in our Western media and by our government officials is talk about Israel's right, or dare I even say, quote, burden, to defend itself. And our Western countries continue sending arms without any strings attached, which is unprecedented in world history, without any strings attached, giving all these arms. And on top of that, in the United States, we're giving them to Israel in violation of our own domestic laws, which say that we cannot provide military funding to countries that block humanitarian aid, which Israel is doing. The U.S. consistently abuses its veto power at the UN Security Council by blocking any and every binding UN resolution to hold Israel accountable. So when we see images of headless children, as we're seeing right now, live streamed on our phones, a genocide, images of headless children, a fetus unearthed from ruins, little corpses carried in rice sacks, children with polio, starved children, a 6-year-old little hen, we saw her video, calling out for help on her phone, calling an ambulance, saying, "Come get me, I'm scared, please help." We can't unsee this truth. And when we hear from the doctors in the hospitals in Gaza that they're treating children who have sniper shots to the chest and heads, we know that these children are being targeted. We cannot deny that these children are many scarred beyond repair, amputated, are being condemned en masse to psychological trauma to last for generations. And this is not something that humanitarian aid can solve. But all this did not begin on October 7th, like the media might have you think. A 16-year-old in Gaza, someone who was 16 in Gaza on October the 7th, at the start of the recent genocide would have already lived through 3 wars, not to mention having lived their entire life in what's been called an open-air prison, enclosed by a 9-meter concrete wall. As the Palestinian scholar Stephen Salita has recently wrote, we're each undergoing a psychic intifada because we always knew that the Zionist entity did not finish the job in 1948. So what is happening now is a continuation of what's been happening since 1948. So we need to ask ourselves, if tens of thousands of children and their mothers and fathers are killed in broad daylight for the entire world to witness, to live stream on their phones, and the leader of this genocide is applauded by the US Congress, by the strongest country in the world, does it matter? Of course it matters. It matters for you, it matters for me, it matters for all of us. And it matters for many reasons. It matters first and foremost because our governments, our American, our European governments, are committing these crimes against humanity because we are complicit in our transfer and sale of weapons. This also matters to us here in the West because it's putting on display the fallacies or the problems with our democracies. Our democracies, we say they're set up for the will of the people. But we clearly see, at least in the United States, that special interest groups, in the US, the Israeli lobby, AIPAC, is having great power, superseding the will of the people. It puts on display the fallacies of our democracies as well because we proclaim that our media is our checks and balances. In the United States, we call it our fourth estate. But we see that media is for profit in our democracies, and that such media allows for the manufacturing of consent of genocide. It matters because our democracies proclaim that they have robust free speech laws, but we're seeing right now that our free speech laws are being conflated with anti-Semitism. If somebody criticizes Israeli state crimes, they are considered anti-Semitic. So it matters for all this, and it also matters quite simply because of our shared humanity. Violence can turn towards any of us at any time, and we all need to know that international law, which was created after World War II, after the Holocaust, with the idea of never again, we need to know that that law is really there to protect us, and it's not being ignored, as the ICJ is being ignored right now. So this book about Palestinian children, these canaries in the coal mine for all the children of war in this world, this book has been in the making 7 years, but couldn't be more relevant than this moment right now. I decided to make the book because despite the increasing volume of scholarship that depicts children as political actors, there isn't a cohesive framework to express children's relationship with oppressive political power, and particularly not for Palestinian children. In conventional resistance studies, or just in general, it's often thought that children don't engage in, quote, real resistance. They don't know how to resist. Or if people talk about resistance of children, particularly in Palestine, then maybe they'll talk about it, but it's always in regard to something, in regard to inter- or intra-generational struggles, or it's considered in regard to adult-led resistance or adult-led policies of empowerment for children. So the essential question to ask, that this book asks, is not if children are resisting, Palestinian children, but how they're resisting. And this book finds through all the chapters, that Palestinian children have a will to survive Israeli oppression and demand its end, despite their lack of conventional political and economic capital. So how do they do it? How do they survive? In large part, Palestinian children rely quite resourcefully on what they have. All they have, their bodies, in flesh and in mind. And this is a phenomenon this book refers to as lived resistance. Lived resistance, this term echoes a tradition of lived nation, lived religion, terms that were coined by Finnish scholars, actually, in Tampere at the Hex Center of Excellence. So lived resistance takes account for the body. It's, as I wrote up here, the embodied process by which people purposely resist, individually and collectively, unjust domination in their daily lives. And as this diagram shows, you can't read it in detail, but it's in the book, we try to understand children's resistance, not by the end point, but by the starting point. The point where their bodies meet the oppression and meet where their position is in society, their race, class, and gender. And when we do that, we find that the resistance of children has 4 general characteristics, which I'll go through. But before I go through, let me just outline for you the broad strokes of the book so you know how these characteristics play out in the book as well. So the book itself begins with the words of young themselves. It begins with the words of Jana and Ahed Tamimi, 2 young ladies in the West Bank. One of them bills herself as the youngest card-carrying journalist in the world. And they talk about what they see and what they want from this world. And then the book moves into my introduction, which starts with this image up here on the cover of the book. And the introduction says, if we take this image, this children's artwork created in the 2014 assault on Gaza, and we look at it as if it were scholarly material, we would find just as important and sophisticated topics in this little children's drawing as we do in our big academic journals. We find in this drawing topics of hegemony and transgression. The important thing, as I've said before, is to take children seriously, to move out of an adult-centric world. And then the book goes into Chapter 1, which is about an ABC alphabet book that was created in the Aida refugee camp near Bethlehem. And the children take each letter of the alphabet and make it represent their daily life under occupation. Then we get into Nitin's chapter, which he will talk about, which is creative meaning-making as resilience and participatory media programs. And then my chapter looks at the emotional ways of resisting, particularly through suicide. And the last chapter in that first section looks at children's activism and how it's shaped by local and global factors. An interplay of settlers moving in and resisting at the same time against international donor agencies, which have their own agendas, which aren't always helping Palestinians. Part 2 of the book gets into, the first chapter starts out with Israel's practice of withholding Palestinian children's bodies from their parents, ridiculing these parents, not letting them mourn and properly bury these children. And the second part looks again at the bigger experience of being a child under occupation. We get a chapter on the 2 justice systems in Israel, one for Jewish Israelis and one for Palestinian Israelis, and how they have different terms of sentencing and different rehabilitation opportunities offered to them. Different, no due process for the Palestinian children in this system versus the Jewish Israeli. We have a chapter that traces the Israeli military detention system for Palestinian children, how that plays out. And then a chapter on the child protesters in Silwan in East Jerusalem and how they're resisting settlers. Chapter 3, the final chapter of the book, looks at parent-child relationships and resistance. We have a chapter on e-fathering, how fathers who've lost their children are mourning their children in the cyber world, how they're using Facebook posts. She goes through hundreds of fathers' Facebook posts and looks at how they're mourning and trying to still father even though the child is gone. We have a chapter then on the Amari refugee camp and how the children there feel alienated by the entire world, including the PA and the neoliberal policies of the PA. And we have a final concluding chapter on mother-child relationships and how mothers who are so traumatized already, how can they even comfort their own children? So this resistance that the children are practicing, I told you there's 4 characteristics of it. One is that these children take a very different approach to citizenship than you and I might. We might see citizenship as something that is like an adult who goes to the ballot, who goes to elections and votes, but they don't see citizenship like that. For one thing, they're children, so they don't have the right to vote. And also, they don't buy into the governing system. It doesn't speak to them, whether it's the PA, whether it's Israel, whether it's the two-tier system in Israel, whether it's the Israeli military occupation in the West Bank, whether it's even UNRWA, the UN, or religious institutions. They don't connect and feel connected to the governing institutions. So they may move beyond the conventional idea of a citizen who goes and votes. Even though you and I, our voting, that also could be a form of complicity, not even resistance, because we're buying into the system as it exists in our own societies. But the idea of resisting through voting doesn't happen for these children. So they often try to take a more interconnected approach to citizenship, trying to look at the whole human experience, that we're all citizens of this world together. Another example of another characteristic of their resistance is that it's often social justice oriented, so that rather than pursuing legal rights within a state system, they're often simply calling for social justice, such as their right to play, their right to move, their right to go swimming, their right not to have power outages. And these social justice oriented nature of their resistance is often borderless, right? It pushes beyond the confines of the nation state as where you're going to get your empowerment. And we see lots of chapters that deal with this, moving beyond the confines of the national system, but I won't go into detail about that. And their resistance is also very symbolically oriented. So it's not always something that you can touch. Like you can't say, okay, there's a child at a demonstration, he's resisting. Yes, that happens, but sometimes their resistance is intangible. It's in their imagination. It's in simply putting on a cap when you go outside to protect yourself from a falling bomb. It's in envisioning a different future for yourself, imagining what a future Palestine could look like in your head. A resistance can also be resistance to control the psyche, to not let the settler colonialism come in and take over your mind. Resistance can also be spiritual, can be through prayer. It can be through also, I have a chapter about self-harming as a form of speaking and communicating. And the resistance is also contingently based, meaning it's messy. It's not straightforward. It's not always straightforward dealing directly with Israel. Sometimes it can be dealing with lateral issues at the same time, like family dynamics, resisting against your parents at the same time as your parents' politics or your parents' wishes, at the same time as resisting against Israeli settlers who are moving in next door. And this resistance is messy in that it can be cumulative. It doesn't have to happen in one instant moment to say, oh, they resisted. It could be something like looking back and remembering something as a form of resistance. So I'll read to you a brief section from my book that illustrates children, this idea of lived resistance, using your whole body, your mind, and your flesh to resist. So this is on page 7. A tangible example of lived resistance is found in the photograph that went viral in 2018 of a 9-year-old Gazan boy, Mohammed Ayash, wearing a homemade onion mask while at the front of Land Day protest at the Gaza-Israel border. His picture is up here. Oh, his picture is not up there. This is his picture. This is Mohammed, right? He made this, quote, gas mask by sticking the bulb of an onion in a disposable surgical mask. He later explained that he thought sniffing an onion would neutralize Israeli tear gas, as he had heard stories of his father using such a technique during the first Intifada. Mohammed's face mask is thoughtfully conceived, yet at the same time it is playful. In the image, long green onion stalks, still attached to the bulb, protrude from the mask perpendicular to his nose and rise a few inches above his little head. The overall image of Mohammed is bittersweet. A young person being silly, yet engaged in a serious fight against the Israeli settler colonial forces. He seeks to withstand the toxic smell, blurry vision, and stinging touch of tear gas, while at the same time draw attention to the memory and continued practice of Israel's confiscation of Palestinian land. All the while he does so while standing in a land that other Palestinian children have described as, quote, non-breathing, non-living space. To demand justice, he places his body in a highly symbolic location, at the limit line of the open-air prison that strips him of all rights to citizenship. He rebuffs Israel's bodily control and containment of Palestinians through his body itself. He seems to remain silent, refusing engagement with the language of the Zionist political regime, yet allowing his presence to be a medium of expression that says the unspeakable. The image of Muhammad captures how he braids his body and mind together in a quintessential form of lived resistance. We're going to have the video in 1 second. Before I wrap up, I want to point out that this lived resistance continues till today, right now, this moment in Gaza. I have two little examples of this. First is in 2023, right after the October 7th started. Palestinian Children in Gaza held a makeshift children's congress. And I'll play here you the clip of a young boy who stands pleading for his protection, and he's right before the bombed hospital of Al-Shifa, where almost half of the injured are children. You can play that clip.
Since the 7th of October, we face extermination, killing, bombing falling over our heads. All of this of front of the world. They lie to the world that they kill the parties, but they kill the people of Gaza, their dreams and their future. Kids of Gaza run out of death once and once. We come to Al-Shifa hospital to keep us from bombing. We suddenly run out of death more after bombing the hospital. The occupation is starving us. We don't find water, food, and we drink from the unusable water. We come now to shout and invite you to protect us. We want to live, we want peace, we want to judge the killers of children. We want medicine, food, and education. And we want to live as the other children live.
So he has nothing like the Swedish young environmental activist Greta Thunberg, who has the ear of some political leaders and the tools to organize multi-city protests. He has none of that, but he's still demanding justice. How? With his body. He's resisting in his own way, and his body, he puts his body in a very important location, at a place of destruction of life. And all the while, he's drawing attention to his life through the mere existence of his body, a body that's refusing to be erased. And his body is, like all children, this is why they're targeted in war, because their bodies are repositories of past and future generations. So if you eliminate those bodies, then you eliminate the past and the future. And that is, of course, the goal of settler colonialism. We also see Sarah here broadcasting from Gaza with a missing limb, and she's clearly letting her wound stay open. Her wound is staying open, right? She's not hiding her arm. She's deliberately maneuvering whatever remains of her body to not let it be pushed out of view. So to conclude, I'm reminded of the 1994 inaugural speech of Nelson Mandela, and he quoted an American poet about how people who are oppressed inspire us. And I can read from the last 4 lines. It says, "And as we let our own light shine, we unconsciously give other people permission to do the same. As we are liberated from our own fear, our presence automatically liberates others." And this is what every child, man and woman, person in Palestine is doing. In Arabic, it's called Muqawma Shawbiya or Samud. And when we see Palestinians resist in all their myriad ways, we know our collective humanity is worth fighting for, and their fight and their resistance actually also liberating us. We're empowered by the Palestinians' light, by their hope, by their love, by their laughter, by their voices, however seemingly faint and powerless. And the last chapter in the book, or the last section in the book, is by a South African poet who has a poem about just this, about how the Palestinian children are pulling us all together to fight for humanity. And I'll play for you her poem, which is also, of course, as I said, written out in the book.
More than a quarter of those killed in Gaza have been children. Hamza Mahmoud Yassin was just 12 years old. Hamada and Ammar were killed by strikes from an Israeli helicopter.
58 of them have been children.
I wish you whole, as words water a flower beneath the yellow rays of yearning, beneath the reach of growling pains. I wish you inviolable dreams flourishing under the silent yet attentive gaze of the moon. I wish you a sky open enough and ready for thoughts of light. Simple earthly delights pouring in and out of this moment. I wish you alive, a child of Gaza, playing a game of cards in the blossoming pathway of unfolded wings. Here, a wish for you, of brave dreamlings, touching your eyes at dawn, picking shells along the beach with your brother on the roof of your home, feeding doves, fitting your wedding gown, marveling at the beat of your sister's heart, laughing at your father's funny stories, happy, harvesting olives and memories.
Now we'll hear more about the children of Gaza and their resistance from Nitin Sawhney, Professor of Practice at Aalto.
Thank you, everyone, for coming today. Hearing Natalia's words from South Africa is really endearing. I spent some time in South Africa a few months ago, and the extraordinary solidarity among South Africans in Johannesburg, Cape Town that I saw is really quite touching. My talk is going to be about the chapter that I wrote on invisible lives, visible determination, creative agency as a form of resilience among Palestinian children in Gaza. I want to thank Heidi for inviting me nearly 7 years ago to join her effort to bring together scholars and researchers and everyday practitioners to this really extraordinary collection of essays that we all wrote. And she worked very carefully with all of us in having us produce a volume that I think is really quite special. And I hope you'll have a chance to flip through it. I also want to thank Syksy and Randa for joining us today on this panel. We've had 3 extraordinary events at the launch of this book series already in Turku, Tampere, and yesterday at Aalto University, and it was really delightful to be here at Helsinki University at the Think Corner to talk about this. The picture you're seeing here is taken in Shufat refugee camp in East Jerusalem, and it's taken by a photographer, Anne Pack. She's a French photographer who I've worked with for many years. And for me, it captures a lot of the poetic elements of what children are seeing and going through today. They're living in exile, sometimes twice or thrice transplanted from their original homes. They're living in these refugee camps, and they're trying to think about their aspirations and future in the midst of a very difficult occupation. But they also have beautiful friendships with each other. And the childhood that they're having is extraordinary, magical, and yet under the most challenging circumstances that anyone can imagine. So as a researcher, I set out many years ago to begin thinking about how these children are coping with all this. How are they dealing with all this adversity and risk in their lives and yet remaining somehow resilient? As you might know, the notion of risk is a psychosocial concept. It's a kind of adversity and a stressor that inhibits people's normal functioning. We went through risk during COVID, and we were dealing with that and trying to figure out how we cope with it. And resilience is an attainment of desirable social outcomes and some form of emotional adjustment that helps us adapt to these contexts of risk. Now, many scholars like Teresa Betancourt have been thinking about a more ecological approach of how we understand our relationship to risk and resilience, and they're typically determined by both protective factors that are internal, mental, psychosocial factors, as well as protective processes that are to do with our environment, our family, our friends, our peers. And they together allow us to think ecologically about how we deal with this. So resilience comes from this term of resile, kind of springing back and recalling to a form of functioning. But what might you consider normal functioning in a context like Palestine, where they're going through decades of extraordinary military occupation and oppression? How are new forms of functional competence emerging among these children? How are they making sense of their environment and the violent conflict they're going through all the time? And Brian Barber, a really extraordinary scholar, I've come to get to know his work, actually posits an interesting notion that there might actually be some positive outcomes of exposure to traumatic events that stimulate adaptive responses for positive change. This is a very contradictory thing. Most of Western psychology talks about PTSD and trauma as a debilitating force, but somehow there are facets of this process that actually allow people, young people, children to adjust in ways that we're still trying to understand. And the work that Brian did in Bosnia and in Gaza over the years actually has been very inspiring. He wrote a book called Adolescence and War that I've been very engrossed in for many years. And then I started to understand what was the key position he was taking. And what he found in his fieldwork in Bosnia, for example, that young people during the wars in the Balkans were very traumatized, and they were unable to explain why the war was happening. They were having terror in their memories and dreams. They're having very dysfunctional accounts of themselves. Whereas when he worked in Gaza, it was interesting that many young people were absent of this negative functioning. They were actually functioning quite well in their environment, and they were providing very passionate narratives of the conflict. If you ask any 6 or 7-year-old in Palestine about what's happening, they'll give you this extraordinary speech about the Intifada and the conflict and the occupation and the Nakba. I mean, they've been completely steeped in this narrative. So how are these two groups, and why are they actually responding so differently to violence and political conflict? This is something many of our scholars in this community have been trying to make sense of. So about 20 years ago, I began a project in Palestine called Voices Beyond Walls. Since 2006, I was going almost every year for several years to the Palestinian Territories, the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and eventually to Gaza. And I work with a number of amazing, extraordinary youth centers and community centers all over the West Bank and Jerusalem in about 8 or 10 different refugee camps. And we built an organization, a kind of a nonprofit a solidarity group that was bringing artists, activists, filmmakers, educators to Palestine from the US at the time, and to work in conjunction with young Palestinians and development and psychology experts to think about what kind of programs can we create with young people to help them understand their own narratives and produce photography, media together. So our goal was to do a lot of capacity building through training these trainers in the community centers, but also then conducting storytelling workshops with young children in these camps and using a lot of techniques like storyboarding, spatial mapping, script writing, photography. And the goal was for them to then have some confidence in their own narratives and exhibit their work in their own communities and elsewhere. And I began, over many years thereafter, conducting longitudinal research, psychosocial research, on the role of participatory media, what role it might have on conditions of resilience, civic agency, and advocacy among these young people. So let me take you to one of the places where we worked. This was Shufat, the photograph you saw earlier, the Shufat camp in East Jerusalem. It's an extraordinarily densely packed place with layers and layers of memory and history. And here you see young children actually going out, photographing, exploring their neighborhood with their youth coordinators and explaining what they see, talking about the wall, the dividing wall that's essentially cutting through most of West Bank and is part of their lived reality. And also taking us through their camp and telling us what is so special about the places where they live. And we asked them to do these spatial mapping exercises where they took their photography and then drew cognitive maps of what it was like to go to school every day. What were the places that they found memorable? What were the places they found that had fear and anxiety? And they would like walk through these amazing spatial maps with us and use that as the basis for fictional stories they would develop, combining their dreams, aspirations, and their lived experience into really humorous, sometimes poetic stories that they would want to storyboard and write about. And then they would work in small production teams and actually go out and film them. And it was a whole lot of fun going out with them in the narrow streets of Jerusalem, filming, and as they were going on set and saying, cut, take two, and they were like becoming little filmmakers, and suddenly Israeli soldiers would show up and be like, what are you guys doing here? And they would detain a couple of kids, and then they would get released, and they would come back and shoot the next day. This was their everyday experience, and they were quite having a lot of fun with it. So we did this kind of work for many years all over the West Bank, and we trained young people, and we produced nearly 70 or 80 short films that they produced. And they varied in all kinds of genres, science fiction to documentary to narrative fiction, and you can find these films on YouTube today, and it's almost a visual ethnography of their lives from 2006 to 2012, I think, that we had continued working with them. Now, I was very concerned that we needed to work in Gaza. Gaza, since 2006, had been completely blockaded territorially by the Israeli military, and there was no way to get in and out of Gaza except for two small crossing points on the very north, Erez crossing, and Rafah crossing through Egypt. And very few Palestinians could go in and out. They required special permits, and some internationals who had humanitarian rights permits or film journalism or development work, they could get in for short periods of time. But Gaza has been blockaded, land, air, and sea, and has been, since 2006, living this really, really difficult, considered the most densely packed prison in the world. So you can imagine the challenges young Gazans were feeling, and whenever they would have internationals come work with them, it was really, really important, and it was a big act of solidarity for them. So I began going to Gaza since 2009. It took me quite an effort to get in through Egypt. I used my research sort of protocol as a key thing to help me get in as a researcher working with the Gaza Mental Health Institute in Gaza City, and then began working in Jabalia camp where the Women's Training Center was, where we'd spent most of our time. But while I was there as a filmmaker, I was also photographing their everyday lives and capturing what was happening. Here you see, these are actually photos taken by Anne Pack, my collaborator, where you see fishermen going out to sea, but also carrying the flag of Barcelona, because the football games were happening and they were all watching Barcelona. And it was just very joyful. It can be a very joyful place when it's not being bombed. It can be a place of real extraordinary wealth and community, and you see the lives of these fishermen every day, and you see women coming together nearly at sunset having tea together, and it's was an oasis of calm for certain moments for Gazans, and that allowed them to survive despite being blockaded. But there were also refugee camps where many Gazans had come from parts of the West Bank during the Nakba, during the 1948 exile, and had been twice displaced in these camps. This is Jabalia camp, where I spent a lot of time. And these camps were living realities of memories of people, of community and social fabric, and were places where I went to many weddings and went to people's homes for lunch and tea. And there were places with elderly and young people in concert, and children took over the walls of all the camps. They were inscribing their aspirations. Over 50% of Gaza is children under the ages of 15, and they're very present everywhere. And they have embraced their lives there despite these restrictions. And so you hear laughter and joy everywhere, or at least you did in moments of calm. Now, I began working in Gaza City initially to do a training workshop, training trainers, adult trainers who had worked in psychosocial issues and development, and I asked them to join me in conducting workshops in Jabalia camp thereafter, where we work with young children and their communities. And then we also did some work on the northern frontier of Gaza with young children who make kites, and I'll get to this at the very end, why we ended up there. This was a very complex research protocol. We actually had 2 sets of teams, one in the West Bank, one in Gaza, working simultaneously with a control group and a workshop group, an intervention group, and doing baseline studies, surveys, qualitative research, follow-up work. So we designed this entire study in conjunction with MIT, where I used to be, and the Gaza Mental Health Program, to be able to have some real hypotheses we could test and some outcomes that we could think about in terms of what effect does participatory media have, narrative storytelling have on their everyday lives. And it's a longitudinal study, so it took over a 2-year period for us to begin to draw on these results. Of course, we would spend time one-on-one with their families. Here I invited mothers who had their kids coming to the refugee camps, schools to come meet with us and have discussions with us about what the kids are going through. And then we actually worked with the young kids themselves in these workshop settings. And, you know, it's their summer. They didn't want to be in a research study. They wanted to play and have fun. And so we made our workshops really playful and enjoyable and tried to engage with them in ways that they would enjoy being part of it. And they would be storytelling exercises. They could write about their everyday lives, their dreams, their aspirations, their challenges. And then one super fun thing we began to do was audio journaling. Peer-to-peer audio journaling. So we would have kids interview each other about a special moment in their lives, or something they remembered, or some difficulty they went through, and they would interview each other and tape record that. And it was meant to be a peer-to-peer exercise that we recorded and that we could analyze later. But they were able to do it very, very effectively because children have subcultural capital with each other. We don't have that capital with them. They will say things to other kids they won't reveal to anyone else. They won't reveal to adults. But they were willing to do that here, and with consent from them, we were able to then ask them about why they said certain things and what they mean, and so on. And so they did this with each other, and of course the young boys also got to try this. And one interesting consequence of doing this was not only that they were articulating things in a much more expressive and poetic way, but they were learning to listen to each other, learning to ask questions, be curious, learning to interview. And this was a really good skill set they learned, because then when they were making their films, they were interviewing other people, and they became really good journalists who could go out and do this stuff. There were dance workshops, and then there was photography. I had my photographer friend, Ann Pack, and many others come and work with these kids, and they learned everything about photography, rule of thirds, framing, positioning, and these are their photographs. They brought this intimacy and warmth to each other in taking these photographs in the camp, and it was just, we couldn't believe the pictures they were taking and the way they captured the spontaneity of life in their camps, and also the kind of humor and stories. So we asked them to title and label every photograph with some descriptive title, and every title was really funny and really interesting and evocative. This visual literacy helped them then think about, once they had made their storyboards, how could they go out and film these with actual production-level cameras. And here's Hamad, who's taken my expensive Panasonic camera and basically wanted to learn how to use it and make it part of his film. And he wanted to be the cameraman. He didn't want to be in front of the camera. And we had to work very closely with Hamad to train him on becoming a really good videographer. He did a great job. And his team did this investigative film about what happened to many families whose homes were bombed and they lost their family members. And they did a really great way of actually walking through different people's homes and having those conversations and filming it. And so some films were serious like this. Other films were completely playful and funny and dealt with other whimsical stories. But Hamad was he's 9, and he was just a really, really good videographer, very focused, on set. And when he wasn't filming, he was total slapstick comedian. But the hard work happened in the editing room. So after we had done all the filming, we would look at their footage, look at their production notes, and we would say, okay, now you've got to make this into a short film that you can actually tell a story through. So they had to work really hard through that. And then we did exit surveys and asked about their experiences. This is a different team of mine that then began analyzing the results of our workshops. This team actually is in Jerusalem. I worked with them for 2 years. And there was another team in Gaza. And it was a lot of material we had to review. Photography, field notes, audio recordings, and it was a lot of work to go through that and figure out what constructs are these kids talking about. What are the things that are fears and anxieties? What are the key issues? And these are young students in psychology at Al-Quds University, and they did a great job analyzing this data with us, and we published many articles together. So let me show you, and this will be my last academic slide, and then I'll get into something a bit more fun. Is going back to the question I posed at the beginning, why did young people in Bosnia and Gaza respond so differently to conflict? We have 3 hypotheses coming out of our work that I think we have pretty strong evidence for. One has to do with narrative coherence. Palestinians have a very strong sense of narrative about why things are happening to them, the long arc of the Nakba since 1948, and all of the things that they've gone through, the displacement of their families from their homes. Many of them talk about the keys they still hold to their homes. They have this intergenerational communal narrative that they're holding on to. They have narrative coherence. Bosnian kids, when the war in the Balkans broke out, didn't have any idea why this war was happening, what was going on. It was very fragmented for them. So they were having trouble explaining things, and this is why they were feeling even more traumatized. There was a protective factor that was happening, had to do with the social networks of family, peers, and community that Palestinian kids definitely have in the intergenerational families they're part of, in the mixed living situation they have in camps. That's very, very important. And the last one is civic agency. Young Palestinians, at least at the time in Gaza and the West Bank, were going to protest. We're talking about these things, making short films. They had a kind of agency. Now, all these 3 factors were really helping them cope. And the other data we found from other studies in Gaza, which actually colleagues of mine in Tampere have been analyzing, showed that young kids, even after a bombing campaign, even after violence and forms of PTSD, snapped back pretty quickly. Within a few weeks, they were functioning normally again. I mean, there may be some long-term traumas they're dealing with, but the actual survey showed that they were kind of back to normal functioning, at least some of them, not all of them. And part of the explanation could come from these factors. Now, I have to caveat all of this, because today, in the genocidal destruction and horrific violence that these kids are being exposed to, all these factors are breaking down. Most of these kids don't have any idea why the brutality that's happening to them is going on and why the world is not doing anything about it. Their family members have been lost. So many children have lost all generations of their family. They're orphaned. And besides the examples Heidi just showed of them giving press conferences, most kids are can't figure out what to do. What can we do? Where's our agency anymore? So it's breaking down massively right now, and they will have long-term trauma because of this. So we have to be vigilant that we can't expect kids to be resilient forever. They need these protective mechanisms to support their resilience, and that is massively under attack right now. So it may take a very long time for them to get to a different place. Let me now share with you very quickly the stories of these young girls that I spent time with in Siefa refugee camp, in Siefa village in the north of Gaza. And I was there basically filming a documentary with the kids I had trained on filmmaking. So I challenged them, hey, let's go make a long documentary film together. There's a big kite festival the UN is organizing. Let's find some kids who actually are really expert kite makers and follow them. So my ragtag production team came with me with their cameras, and we had a very intimate moments of working with these kids. Kids were filming, kids were on camera, and we had this really beautiful journey together, and with just a lot of humor and a lot of warmth. And we were filming every day in the village and by the seaside. And in fact, the kids were also rigging up cameras in bottles to film from the sky. They made like kite drones to film things because they wanted to be part of the festival. And they were just super ingenious. And of course, the camera crashed and failed many times, but we still managed to make it work. And again, Hamad was helping us in the production. And then we had time to spend with other younger kids and ask them about their dreams, their aspirations, and what they're going through. So all that is captured in this 1-hour documentary film, which I'm not going to show today, but you can access online for free. It's called Flying Paper. And this is Musa at the time he was 12 and was kind of the kid with the most expertise. And he learned all of the kite-making techniques from his grandfather, and he trained other kids. And this is during the festival in Gaza, which the UN organized, and they were trying to break the world record for the most kites ever flown, and they did. And it was a beautiful moment by the sea, and some of these young girls were then interviewing the kids about how they felt about it and so on. And all of this is captured in our hour-long feature film. This was the last day of our shoot when we were all together as a production team. And Abir was my co-producer in this film. She was one of the girls I trained in Jabalia camp, but she also had a lot of maturity and wanted to really take on journalism and spend time working behind the camera and also sometimes in front of the camera, working with the characters. And she's the only young person in Gaza I stay in touch with almost every day. We message each other every day, and she's the only person I know is still alive in Gaza. All these other kids, I have no idea what's happened to them, and I'd like to find out if I ever get back to Gaza again. But this is the film that came out in 2013. It was shown in about 150 festivals around the world, and recently, in the last 1 year, it's been shown again in dozens of places all over the world. And we use it as a way to get the word out, to get people to understand and humanize young children in Gaza in a different way. Once the film was finished, we actually then continued working with our team in Gaza and made a lot of many short films about fishermen, about things that happened in Gaza after that. There was a bombing in 2014, and we went back to Gaza. Many of my production team members were there, and we then made this film. It's a 10-minute sequel. So I'd like you to play that for you, and then I'll end shortly after that.
عشان ما تنفقش عملوا موسى
ورجينا تختك وينه؟
تختي بهاي غدا.
You can raise the volume if you want.
My cat is best.
Allô? Allô?
It's a house for me and my wife to rest for the rest of our life. Yeah. This is the first time within 3 or 4 months I'm here upstairs. Here it's dangerous, and I don't want to give any wrong signal to our neighbors. Yeah, it's just a house, nothing else. You understand what I mean? I mean my neighbors, our dear neighbors, the Israelis. I mean them. Yeah. This is a house for rest, for regular life, not for any other thing or any other purpose. Yeah. And this must be clear for everybody.
تشوف الجورة قديش صح.
السلام عليكم.
الله يسلمك. يقدر أخويا يقدر ابني.
ما يفرق شيء.
بعين الله الحمد لله.
الحمد لله.
والله طلعنا الحمد لله. طلعنا من هان أول شيء ضربونا في المدفعية.
طبعا هذا البيت لأبو موسى الغول. طبعا هم كلهم بعرفهم أنا من فترة مش من هلا، بعرفهم من زمان. فلما رجعت قابلتهم مرة تانية بعد الحرب اللي صارت، الحرب الأخيرة هاد. طبعا البيت ما في بيت، البيت اللي كنت أجي نقعد فيه مش موجود، مدمر كله. طبعا مش متعودة على هذا المنظر، متعودة إنه يكون البيت وكل شيء في مكانه. طبعا نفسيات الأطفال كلها تغيرت، مش زي ما كانت بالأول. أكيد طبعا الحرب مأثرة عليهم كتير، وإنهم هلأ عند جدهم مش في البيت تبعهم.
هذا هو بيتنا، وهي أنا هنا كنت هذه غرفتي أنا وأختي بننام هنا، وهي هنا مكانه يعني، فيش إشي يعني في مكانه. كان في مكتب هنا مش عارفة وين راح، يعني تحت كل الركام. فيش إشي مبين من هنا يعني غرفتنا راحت دمرت، فيش إشي ضايل فيها. هاي تختي برضك كنت أنا أنام هين، يعني لو أنا ما كناش نازلين تحت كان رحنا فيها أنا وأختي.
هلا وداد بعد ما خلصت الحرب قديش انه نفسية الاطفال تعبانة وانها متأثرة سلبيا بعد الحرب؟
متأثرة كمان كتير، أنا بشوف يعني متأثرة. وعندي أنا عينة كمان في الدار اللي هي أختي طالعة صف خامس. بس أنا قبل يومين كنت في المطبخ فوقعت مني الصينية، كانت هي نايمة صحيت تعيط من الصوت، فبتخاف يعني حتى بتفكروا صوت قصف. أنا تخيلاتي يعني أنا صح إني رايحة متوقعة ومش متوقعة إني أنا أشوف كلهم أو ما أشوفهمش، وبرضه خايفة إني أنا ما أشوفش صحبات اللي أنا بعرفهم أو اللي بعرفهمش. فهذا برضك بيأثر يعني إذا بنت كانت مش جاية أو مفقودة أو يعني صاير لها إشي من آثار الحرب، فهذا برضك يعني بخلي إنه في شوية خوف. أنا كان عندي تواصل أنا وأكم من بنت بس صحباتي، بس يعني مش الكل، فعشان هيك أكيد رح يكون في شوية خوف. أنا بدي هني طالعة صف 11، تخصصت دخلت أدبي، فبعد ما أخلص توجيه إن شاء الله راح أدرس جامعة وأتخصص تعليم أساسي، لأنه أنا التعليم الأساسي يعني أنا بحب أعلم الصغار وبحب أتعلم وأفيد اللي حواليا. فعشان هيك أنا بحب يعني التعليم الأساسي وبحب الأطفال.
أشهد أن لا إله
It's a part of shield. A part of a shield.
Sharpening?
Oh, sharpening.
No.
This was, you can consider it was my office here. And there was a table and cupboard and my bed. Whenever I want to be alone, I used to come here because it was very good and very quiet and very calm place for me. Unfortunately, they even don't want us to have a second of rest. I think the Israelis start to shoot this room from that side. There was a site there, and by planes also from. It was fired. Yeah, and as you see, everything is ruined. Nothing is still. only the ruins, only the destruction and the bad memories. This is what is still for us. Yeah.
هذه غرفتي زي ما انت شايف. أنا كنت أدرس للثانوية العامة. هاي المكتب وكان هون في شباك وهون شباك وهون في كنت أركز على الحيطة وطاولة صغيرة للدراسة. كله مع الحرب رايح وانت شايف كله راح والكتب اتمزعت، حتى شهادات صف أول وثاني الابتدائي راحت واتمزعت في الحرب مع القصف. اسمي موسى زياد موسى الغول. بدرس في الجامعة سنة أولى. بنعيش في شمال غزة، منطقة شمال غزة، على المنطقة الحدودية الشريط الحدودي قطاع غزة. المميز في هذه المنطقة إنه شجرها، طبيعتها الخلابة، مناظرها الحلوة، الهدوء، السكينة اللي بتتمتع فيه. بغض النظر يعني إنه في غزة مثلا اكتظاظ سكاني، معسكرات، هاي اللي بيجعل المنطقة دي حلوة. أما بالنسبة إنه في الاجتياحات نرحل ليش ما راحلناش، لأنه زي ما بقول سيدي يعني هجرة 48 بدناش نعيدها يعني. سبنا بيوتنا وطلعنا، إذا سبنا بيوتنا وطلعنا برضه نفس القصة حيرجعوا يحتلوها. بس بتوقع للمستقبل يعني زي ما قلت لك الحرب هذه خلصت، حتيجي حرب جديدة وحتيجي حرب بعدها وحتيجي حرب بعدها. بالنسبة الدار أكيد حتتعمر ويمكن تنقصف، حتتعمر يمكن تنقصف، هي هيك.
صوريها.
Okay, so I'm just going to wrap up in a minute. This is what Abir's camp looks like right now. All those beautiful pictures I showed you have been condensed to this. So thank you for listening to this, and I hope we'll have a discussion about all this together. Thank you. Actually, there was a video by Abir that we were going to show. Can we please show that video? Yes, I forgot, it's not in my slides. It's a 1-minute video. It's a testimony she made.
Hello world, my name is Abir Ahmed, I'm from Gaza. Today we face 28th day of aggressions against Gaza Strip. The number of martyrs is exceeded 10,000 and the wounded exceeded 50,000. The massacres don't stop and it happened without any deterrent. The aggression still bomb the hospital, the street, the trees, women and children, journalists, doctors, everything. They destroyed everything beautiful in my sad city. They prevent food aid to reach the people, and there is no water to drink, no food. We wait the death every moment. Actually, I look to my family and I say goodbye to them in my heart because maybe I will never see them again. We are here in Gaza face the biggest injustice and the biggest genocide and the biggest massacres, and whole world do nothing to end these massacres. We are not number. All of us have dreams, have stories we want to tell. and we want to live in peace in our land, Palestine. Hello world, my name is Abir Ahmed.
You can stop it now. Abir sent me that testimony in middle of November when her family was displaced from Jabalia camp for the first time in Rafah. And somehow she has survived the onslaught until now. And I'm still in touch with her every day. But I don't know how much longer most Palestinians will be able to deal with this. So, thank you.
Now we'll hear from Randa Al-Dawoudi, Palestinian journalist, marketing strategist, activist, who has spent most of her childhood in Gaza. Do you want to come here?
So this is working, right? Yeah. So hello, everyone, and thanks for listening, and thanks for inviting me. First of all, let me tell you that I spent the night sleepless and crying over our childhood and our children in Gaza. I wrote some words, so I can start with it. But before that, I want to express how these videos and the photos that both showed was like triggering many things in my childhood, especially when I saw the children trying to talk in English to express what they are facing and how they want and seek help from the world and to make their stories heard from everyone. But unfortunately, we could not help them, and we all feel helpless, like we could not do anything for them. So we can talk about this later, I think, in the panel discussion, but or when your questions. But my speech title would be "What is the normal life and what is the normal childhood?" It would be like a journey through the eyes of a girl who had lived through 3 aggressions and survived them, but I don't know if survival is the right expression and the right word, as if survival means staying alive, then yeah, I did it. In truth, none of us really survived, and I can't help but feel that we are living by mere chance, simply because we have not been struck down by a stereo missile yet. I am Randa, a Palestinian originally from Barqa, which is in the occupied land in 1948, my family displaced to Gaza, and I almost lived my entire life in Gaza, and my family are living in Gaza for now during this genocide. So I'm working in journalism, writing, marketing, and activism. Let us begin with the little Randa. Back in 2008, I was in the 6th grade when the bombing started while I was in the school. Out of fear, we all began to run. I was always curious child, asking many questions. My mother was the person who listened to these questions very well, and people were always telling her that it's frustrating that you are listening to these questions all the time. But she was a good listener, and she was giving me the answers. And she asked me to always ask and search for the answers. When the bombs began to fall, I remember looking at the sky and wondering, how does a soldier feel when he throws rocket at us, knowing that this is just a school and we are just learning in that school and we don't do anything? Then I went to my mother and I told her that, are they afraid of us learning or being connected to the world? The 2008 aggression left scars that linger to this day. It was a turning point in my life as I lost my mother to the violence. After 2008, she was diagnosed with cancer. And her illness happened because of the aggressions used for forbidden chemicals and weapons like white phosphorus. They are not just making us like having disease, but they are preventing us to have the treatment that we need. So there are more than 14,000 cancer patients in Gaza. They don't have the right to have the treatment of cancer, and we are losing them one by one. This is before even this ongoing genocide, so you can imagine the situation now in this ongoing genocide. My mother passed away after 4 years for fighting to survive. So if survive again is staying alive, so my mother did not survive. I always remember myself as a child, and for now, actually, I'm always asking why the hell I lose my mother in that young age just because we are Palestinian living in Gaza. So Palestinians are not just being killed by missiles, we are being killed in many ways. And a good information that Gaza has been living under siege for more than 17 years. So that's why we don't have the treatment and many things, we are facing lack of this. Then came to aggression of 2014. I will never forget July 12, my older brother Hassan's birthday. The power was out and off. We sat in candlelight, trying to make pizza for a birthday cake. When there was a loud knock at the door, the terrifying sound acted on the stairs, and I turned to my sister Majd and I told her, hey, they are gonna tell you that we have to leave the building. And quickly our neighbors shouted urgently to us, quickly they are going to bomb our neighbor's house, you have to leave. I rushed to my room to get dressed, my heart racing as I glanced our neighbor's house, fearing for the safety. I saw my neighbor's daughter on the balcony. They have not evacuated yet. I started screaming, evacuate now, they are gonna bomb the house. My father was waiting me on the door to get dressed and go out, and we went on the street waiting the house to be bombed. And something that I have to mention that in Gaza there are more than 2.5 million in just 365 kilometers a place, so it's really crowded, and the house is merely like what Nitin just showed to you. It's like slightly, if a house is bombed, the other houses would be bombed at all. So we start to pray like, just to not have this house bombed because we don't have any other place to go, and waiting the house to be bombed in the streets. Moving to this ongoing genocide, recently I added a question on my Instagram and I said, people from Gaza, please just mention to me unforgettable moment that you lived from your childhood during any aggression you lived. And I know that I would receive some heartbreaking stories. But what I received left me sleepless, crying over the night for our loss of what it means childhood. Here are some of their memories and some of the answers. Randa recalled having a panic attack after hearing about a girl who had been raped in Al-Shifa hospital, asking her mother, can we commit suicide if they come to rape us? Randa is just 15 years old. Jannah remembered the day they bullied her neighbor's children from the rubble after 3 days. And she says that their screams forever will stuck in my mind. Jannah is 13 years old. Sarah, 18 years old, shared how she would imagine soldier bursting through the windows, killing everyone in the room and go out, and nothing will happen to these soldiers. Rodina mentioned that she could not sleep days and days, thinking that she would stuck under the rubble and no one can help her, and she would die and be killed just because of lack of oxygen. Muhammad, just 10 years old, described how a quadcopter drone once came on this ongoing genocide to photograph them while they were playing in the house, and how they start walking silently to other room, fearing from this quadcopter drone. Yes. For me, I feel sometimes guilty that I'm safety, and I always question what is the normal life. And I always ask my friends, what did you do in your daily life, like if you are not Palestinian? And what is the childhood, the real childhood? Today, as I stand before you here, I really want to go home and to feel home again in my bunk room, hug my toy. But unfortunately, this dream is not happening anymore because we lost this home. I conclude my speech by considering that there are more than 600,000 people, students, children in Gaza could not attend any school since 7th of October. And I could not print all the photos of the children that we lost just in a year, because it's like more than 12,000 child has been killed. But I tried to print some of them. All of them, they are not numbers. All of them have their dreams, and all of them have the right, all of them have the right to live their lives, but none of them now is among us just because they are Palestinians from Gaza. Thank you.
Thank you, Randa. We'll have a bit of discussion on the stage, and then we'll open up for questions. I'd like to maybe take a step back and ask a question. Why focus on children? Why is it important to focus on children's experiences and children's agency?
I can answer a little, and everyone else is welcome to. As a scholar of the history of childhood, I find that we live in what we can call it an adult-centric world. That's a world that assumes that the adult is always the person acting and the future is for the adult. And it's often, we could compare it to, we live in a Eurocentric world where we assume that the West is the center of the world. Or we live in a world where we feel that it's always a cisgender world, or it's always a male or a female. But there are so many other ways of viewing the world. And when we destabilize our lens of viewing the world, we can get a whole different perspective of the world. So when we put children at the center, it opens up so many new avenues. And then if you think about Palestinian children in general, they're often so misunderstood. So we want to try to understand them better. They're either portrayed as victims. We need to throw humanitarian aid at them, save them, rescue them. We are here to help you. They need our help. Or they're portrayed as violent. They're mini terrorists, the families that breed violence. Or they're portrayed as resilient. They're going to bounce right back. They're okay, they're children. But if we get out of these stereotypes of Palestinian children, we can see so much in between and get a much more wholesome picture of them. And then lastly, children are very important for understanding politics. We don't always relate to children to politics, but genocides can be committed by eliminating a generation of children. You don't just have to round people up and put them in a concentration camp and kill them to kill off a population. You can also take away the education, take away the socialization skills, the ability to play, all the things that you need to create a future generation. You can take that all away to try to kill off a generation. So children are front and center when it comes to settler colonialism being carried out or genocide. Anyone else?
Thank you. Randa, do you want to? Or Nitin?
Focusing on the children, I just can say with one sentence that because they are the future of any place in the world. And dealing, there is something came into my mind all the day and night when this aggressions that I live and the ongoing genocide that my family and my niece and my nephew is living. That what Israel is doing is really terrifying, because terrifying not just for the world, terrifying for itself. Like they are dealing with children. They got more than 20,000 children got orphaned during this ongoing genocide. So can you imagine what these children would feel after this ends? They want to take revenge. So what is happening now is like. It's not just the mental health of these children, the mental health of the children, any children in the world, any child in the world, it's important. So dealing with the children to raise and to make them like a good mentally healthy children so we can build the future peacefully is important. So this is why we should take care and for the children. It's my point.
Thank you. Nitin, do you want to add something?
I'll just bring up 2 points. As a researcher, it was fascinating for me to look at how children construct their lives in these very early developmental stages, in terms of how they use play, storytelling, role-playing, all of these really extraordinary things that they're constantly using to make sense of their lives. And we as adults needed to learn something about their ways of understanding the world. So just as a researcher, I was curious about what are they doing in their storytelling, in their photography, and that in itself was extraordinary. But I think I'm going to go back to what Heidi and Randa are telling us that goes beyond that. There's a kind of courage and a kind of freedom of expression children have that we adults have kind of lost. They will say things as they see it. They will call things out. The other day, Heidi and I spoke at a panel, and there were all these adults there. And at the end, a young person came up to me and said, "Oh my God, your panel was so amazing. It was genius. It was great." Then I saw a 7-year-old kid in front, and I walked up to him and said, "What did you think of the panel?" He was like, "It was decent." I was like, "Okay." Just telling it as it is. They just have this really, and they also have a very poetic way of making sense of the world. So some of the kids I work with in my first workshop ever, actually in Nablus, they were talking about things in such a poetic way. They were channeling their dreams in poetry, and the older kids had forgotten how to do that. The older kids were no longer able to use imagination in the same way. They were regurgitating what the media was saying. But the younger ones, I was like, give them a chance to storytell, because they were doing something really amazing. So from just that perspective, I think there's great. But let's look at what's happening right now among the youngest in our societies, not only in the Middle East here, climate change. Every issue, LGBTQ rights. I go to lots of protests all the time here. Who's at the forefront of these protests? As young people, as children who are channeling this every day. The Greta Thunberg's Friday's march is happening all over the world. So I think the kids are showing us the way forward. They're at the forefront of all these issues because they see their future as being threatened. So I think we have to follow them in figuring out what we have to do next.
Thank you. Another wider question on some relevance of academic research and this in general, and this research in particular. So we now, for over 1 year, Israel has been systematically, physically exterminating Palestinians in Gaza. And our institutions, our governments, our universities, including certainly the University of Helsinki, are continuing cooperation with the entities that are taking part in this genocide, like Israeli universities, for example. So these are very dark times. So my question is, in an age of genocide, what is the role what is the value of academic research in the, in the face of what we are going through, what we are seeing?
It's a very tough question.
Yeah, I ask myself all the time, who am I to be sitting here pontificating about these abstract things when people are on the ground dying? I don't know. I question myself all the time. But I know that we do need a world and a space for thinking, as this is, and that when we eliminate academia and thinking, we destroy humanity. And if you look at some of the places that are targeted in Gaza, all the universities gone, some of the most brilliant scholars there, physicists gone, doctors gone, all the intelligentsia targeted. There's a reason for that. This is scary for people in power, to have people who can think, who can question power. And that's what our job is, to plant the seeds for questioning everything we think is always so true and right. And it doesn't always see tangible results, but I think in the long run, if we keep the thought process and thinking alive, we're serving humanity.
I guess I'll say that we cannot allow these traumatic, horrific world events to prevent us from continuing to do critical scholarship, critical research in these areas, because it's much, much needed. It's even more needed right now. So yes, I talked about the work I did in Gaza in those nearly 10 years ago now, and I talked about those hypotheses and all of those things, and I said with the caveat that now, in this genocide, in this horrific moment, all of those hypotheses now need to be re-questioned. And obviously, we need to go back and conduct more qualitative work on the ground. What is going on with mental well-being among everyone there? How are they coping? What can we do as scholars, researchers, clinicians to support their long-term well-being and development? We can't simply put our hands up and say, oh my God, it's so horrific. It's like saying a surgeon suddenly says, oh my God, this is so horrific. I shouldn't be doing surgery anymore. No, we are professionals. We have a job to do. We have to go back and work there. And I can't wait for a ceasefire so that I can get back in there and meet kids again and say, I'm here with you in solidarity. Maybe all I can do is listen to you, hold your hand, and ask you how you're doing. But over time, build another process of conducting psychosocial work that's needed. So we should not give up. And something I'm doing in 2 weeks is I'm organizing a symposium here in Helsinki called contestations.ai, where I'm bringing together 35 amazing researchers, human rights lawyers, scholars, investigative journalists to come and talk about the role of AI, technology, warfare, and human rights. And the Middle East will be a big part of that. And so we need to reactivate and amplify our work. And if academia doesn't do it, who is going to do it? We are very needed, and our institutions, despite the censorship we might be experiencing, we need to be at the forefront, just like in Berkeley's campuses in Columbia and New York and MIT, where I studied during the Intifada, during the Vietnam War. We were actively engaged. We were showing that we needed to have solidarity. We should be continuing to do that on our campuses. Campuses are the place where we can have that academic freedom. We should honor these places to build a new generation of scholars and critical thinkers. So I'm even more motivated now than I was before, that I have to channel my work even more in these challenging areas.
Randa, do you want to add something?
Yeah, as they mentioned, but I want to mention something else, that one hand could not clap. We need more hands to clap together. Like, we need to be united in the academia sector and then the researchers. Like, it's not just about making these researchers. It's good, and we have to do it, but we have to act. We have to make some actions, and we need some actions. As Nathan mentioned, that scholars and making some events and organizations and these things, we need to talk and we need to act, even in the academia, to encourage people to deal more and to act more. Like, yeah.
Thank you. And let me remind remote viewers or even people on site that you can also put questions in the chat. But following up from this, so Heidi, in the introduction to this book, You write that the ethical task of a researcher in this situation is to amplify the voices of colonized people. And I wonder if you on the panel would like to say something about that responsibility right now beyond what you just said. How do you see this responsibility?
Yeah, it's a responsibility. I come from a place of privilege. I come from the United States. I'm in academia. And yeah, I've traveled to Palestine many times, lived in the West Bank, and I've had one of my, in another book I'm writing, it's following 10 Palestinians over the course of 10 years. But one of my interviewees, he told me, you're going to go back, use this book, you're going to get a promotion, build your career, and you come back here to Jenin, and I'll just be sitting here still smoking my cigarette, like stuck. And, you know, there's some element of truth to what he's saying, that knowledge is power, and we as Westerners use this knowledge to build our careers. So we have to be ethical, and we have to be responsible, and try to just sort of amplify the voices as much as we can. When I go to Palestine, I'm bearing witness, and I can't do much more than that, but bear witness and listen, and come back and share, and try to get I'm trying to get a foot in academia, in different publishing presses that don't want to talk about Palestine. I've an editor tell me, don't call it settler colonialism, call it a land grab. You know, so we can, in our privileged positions, also try to push boundaries in addition to amplifying voices. And I should note that there's also a contributor in the volume, Nadra Shahub-Kevorkian, who has based at Hebrew University in Jerusalem, and has recently been going under a complete an onslaught on her work. She's been put into detention. A case has been raised against her simply because she interviews and does research on children. And that has been called against the safety of the security of the state of Israel. So what we do is dangerous for some people, even though it may seem like we're just, you know, pontificating or in our academic world. Some people are looking in from the power structures and saying, oh, maybe they do have the power to change minds in their work.
Yeah. Randa, do you want to comment?
Oh.
Okay. Nitin, do you want to add something?
You know, what Heidi is saying is spot on. We have a responsibility to both aspects. Your responsibility to ourselves as researchers to tell the truth and to work on things responsibly, and to uphold our professional rigor in the ways we conduct our research. We have to make sure what we produce is really high quality research, but at the same time, we should do that research in conjunction in inclusive ways with our Palestinian colleagues. So whenever I went to Gaza, I built a program with our Palestinian colleagues. We did trainings with them. We published articles together. We wanted to lift their capacity to be seen and heard in the same way. So it's very important we don't colonize research. We actually use our research and create horizontal symmetry and collaboration. And to the extent of the kids I was working with, it was participatory action research. It was with them, their stories, they were at the forefront, and they got credits in the documentary. So everywhere I've tried to use a participatory action research approach in my work, and it's not everyone's cup of tea. Some scholars are much better just doing a solo authored manuscript, and they don't have the patience to spend time developing this infrastructure of research with many people, and that's fine. But I feel more responsible to conduct it that way. But also the responsibility to having their voices in our work, I think is very crucial. And in all of the work I do, in papers and books I write, to the documentary films I make, I try very hard that their voices are sort of foregrounded. So we just have to learn to do this well. It's not an easy thing for most academics how to do this. It's a process of working through it.
Yeah, continuing on the children's voices and thinking about these testimonies, I guess one should call them, Randa, that you read out. Yeah. And I personally find it, especially when it regards, children, it's really particularly chilling. And Heidi, in the introduction of your work, you used the concept of unchilding, and Nitin, in your chapter in the book, you used the evocative phrase, eviction from childhood. You know, even before the genocide, you know, children in Gaza were, and also on the West Bank, were going through so much. So I would ask you, how do you see the relation, you know, between childhood and adolescence, and this transition from, you know, being a child and having the freedom to play, and being an adult and having this responsibility, and children's experience? Do you want to start?
Being a child in Gaza or in the West Bank, raised all the time thinking that you are going to face aggression all the time. You want to play, but you don't know what are you going to play like, because there's no much choices. But we are trying in Gaza, I'm talking about children in Gaza, we are trying to make our life joyful as much as we can, even if it is like all the time under aggressions. Yeah, but I forgot the point that I wanted to mention.
Yeah, it was basically this, you know...
The loss of childhood.
The loss of childhood.
Exactly,
yeah.
The loss of childhood, yeah. That's why I talked that we always, like, not just me, we always questioning what is the normal childhood and what is the normal life, what is, how we can deal with it as normal, like what is and how life could be if you are not Palestinian. What makes you cry? Sometimes we started questioning these things, like, so this is the loss of the childhood. Like, we are not living childhood actually, because we all the time thinking about, like, raised and fearing all the time of losing anyone we love. This is how we raised. We raised like all the time. Yeah, these summer schools. You know what? I just recognized that so many things like just deleted from my mind because I'm trying to protect myself. But when these photos and these videos comes up, and I was like, yeah, I lived this. I got through this as well, and I start like questioning how hard I do meditation all the time, like to heal my inner child, and all the time it comes to my mind these voices of rockets and missiles and bombing, and how we were all the time afraid of anyone can lose any of his family. And yesterday night I was trying to get some videos actually, but because of Instagram and Meta. I could not download them because they are from Gaza. So basically, one of the video for a child, and he lost his entire family. He just left with his one brother, and they both, like, I think 12 years old and 14, or 12 and 10, something like this. But they are children, and the child was saying that, God, I'm okay. It's okay that you took them, but thanks God that they are, like, not cut into pieces. They are the body of their, and it was like, wow. I mean, how a child can just be thanked, like, and just because the body of his family, they are like not cut it. And then he said that, just please don't leave me alone, and don't take anyone else from me. And this is how children being raised in Gaza. So it's really hard. There is something in psychologists means like people when they raised up and they grow up, they try to protect themselves and delete some memories that hurt them. And this is how I believe that we Palestinians who raised in Gaza and left Gaza, and I actually left Gaza 5 years ago, so trying to cope with the normal life. I remember one last thing because of the time. I remember when the first aggression that I was out of Gaza and my family in Gaza, how I coped with that. I could not sleep, I could not eat, I could not do anything. I just cry all the time and holding my phone all the time. And we have these Telegram channels that we look 1 minute by minute by minute, like what is happening. And when I first go out to the street and saw the people, they are walking freely and they are dealing with life normally. They are going to supermarkets and buy things, and everyone is living his life a normal thing. And I was like, hey, we are the only one who could not live their lives freely. And I started questioning what is the reason of being being that alive, being that hard for a Palestinian. So yeah, I hope that I asked this question, and I know that I went to many places, but.
Thank you.
Yeah. I think we should move to audience questions, if it's all right. So any questions from the audience? If there are, we have a microphone.
Maybe we can take 2 or 3 at a time, because we only have 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And we can answer them together.
Questions?
Or from the chat.
Also on the chat, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Please take the microphone. Yes.
Yes. And please introduce yourself to the audience who doesn't know you.
Hi, my name is Mo. Well, I have a question. Basically, what to do next. I understand that it is very imperative and important to describe what's actually happening to the children and what has been happening. I think it has been going on for a very much long time, 75 years, 76 years, I think more than 100, if we consider the First World War and the whatever happened since then. The last year we have seen what maybe no one even imagined. So I'm not sure about the purpose of convincing and describing. While it is very much important, I would really like to know where do we go from here in the context of children. So now, you mentioned more than 20,000 children will be orphaned. What can we do for them? Any organizations, pages for people to follow, things for people to contribute. Just try to think of solutions, if possible, or what do you have in mind? Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions? Let's take 2 or 3 questions together, if there are more. There, Mo, can you take the... please introduce yourself.
Sirkko Kivistö, I belong to the Finnish Psychologist for Social Responsibility, and we have a partnership work a project with a Palestinian NGO in Lebanon. So my experience is from there. But this concept, unchilding, could you please say something more about that? So that I have tried to write the book of Dr. Shalhob Gevorkian, but it takes time to get it really so that I can speak in Finnish about the issue. So give please some more words about unchilding.
Thank you. Do we have a third question in the audience? There.
In front.
Hello, thank you so much for this very important seminar, and it was very emotional. My name is Dan, and I actually would love to maybe elaborate to most questions. That I'm also curious that how we could help, but also would like to know in the correct way that often, especially, I have seen that people feel very sympathized with what's happening in the global south, and I feel that a lot of people have the urge they want to help, but mostly like sometimes it goes wrong, that what happened is more like a white savior, and I think from the past year, like we've seen this and this is not right. And so hence I would love to know what would be the most like correct and decolonial way to help. And also I see that like at least 3 of you are like academic researchers, and I also feel that if researchers or like scholars also have the plan to maybe try or come up with this new like a decolonizing pedagogies, because I also feel that there should be some like revolutionary maybe movement or like changes should be happening in academic systems. I think also I feel the professors also should maybe train themselves and actually really learn about what the anti-racism is, and to somehow dismantle their double standards. Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you. Maybe if we start with the concept of unchilding, Heidi, if you want to briefly.
Was there a question in the back or not?
I think we'll take only 3 questions, those 3 questions,
okay.
because we are short on time.
Let's do one more just so we can get anyone else who didn't have a chance, and then we can address them all if you want. It's up to you. Was there a question or not? I guess we'll just go into the answers.
Unchilding is not a term that I coined. There's a book, you can get it from Cambridge University Press by this woman who has a chapter in our book, Nadra Shalhoub-Kevorkian, and the book is called Incarcerated Childhood and the Politics of Unchilding. And it looks exactly at, she's just writing about what she says the children are telling her. Exactly like Randa said, the children are telling her they're not having a childhood. And so she has this term, well, their childhood is being systematically taken away, and that there's a strategic reason that Israel is doing that. And it's, for these reasons I've been saying, if you take away childhood, if you take away their ability to develop healthfully, healthy development, healthy play, socialization, then you're pretty much trying to eliminate the next generation of Palestinians, taking away that childhood. And yes, we can problematize what does childhood mean, like it varies in time and place, but these children are assuming a sense of childhood like we think of it, a time of innocence, a time of separation from the adult world, a time of protection from the dangers of work, the dangers of violence, and they're telling her that their childhood is being taken away. And that's what the book is about, and the myriad ways that that's happened over the last 100 years.
I'll try to address the two questions regarding what we should do going forward, and how do we do it in the right critical way. Both Mo and Don offered some very important points for us. We cannot live in our research silo, and we cannot live with the current institutional frameworks we're currently in. They're very, very problematic, both from colonizational sort of modes of thinking. We have to break that down. In my teaching at Aalto University, which is a very heavy science engineering school, I taught a course on critical AI and ethics of AI. I bring in issues of colonization. I bring in scholarship from indigenous activists who are working on issues of ethics of AI. And it's a bit unconventional, but the students love reading it, and they had really good ways of thinking about it. But we have to do that in all of our coursework and all of our pedagogies to break down these things and bring in social science theory, bring in political theory into even science-based courses. That's the starting point. We have to do a lot more. And here we have to actually rely on Palestinian scholarship, Palestinian voices. And there's so many amazing Palestinian scholars, some of whose work was in our book, but our mainstream media is devoid of Palestinian voices. Randa is an amazing journalist, but she's not in our mainstream media. There are so many places where we need to reinsert Palestinian voices and have them lead our thinking. As we think about the work that needs to be done in Gaza and in West Bank, we need to talk to our Palestinian colleagues and build working groups, action groups, have them leading that, working in conjunction with them. So none of this stuff should happen from top-down Western approach. I think we need to bring a global South, global North collaboration in all of these things. Our colleagues in South Africa are doing amazing work at the ICJ. And I commend them for that. The West hasn't done it. So I was just in The Hague a few days ago, and I was talking to investigative journalists and human rights lawyers who are now going to take cases forward and are going to bring evidence from the ground. I mean, I'm not sitting around wallowing, and I'm like, I have privilege and I have to act. And I have to act in conjunction with experts around the world and bring them into the fold and bring our Palestinian colleagues to work with us. We have decades of work to do on litigation, on human rights work, on humanitarian relief, on rebuilding Palestinian society again. So I have no patience for fatalism. We need to be optimistic. We need to work together. We need to build a new generation of researchers, scholars, activists on the ground. I'm looking at Palestine 2.0 or 3.0, whatever it's going to be, and I want to be part of that future.
And then there was the question about helping this most question about providing concrete support. What are the best ways of doing it? This
Look,
was also
it's really challenging to do conventional philanthropy right now. Abir, for example, I helped her start a fundraising campaign. We raised about 15,000 euros. It took me weeks to even transfer those funds to a bank where she could even possibly access it. I mean, it's a very, very complicated thing to be doing philanthropy and sending aid. I think that's only a very small part of the equation. The things that Palestinians actually need much more right now is for us to work in media advocacy, work in litigation, work in human rights law, work on the bigger forces. They don't want our pennies and change. I'm sorry, they don't see themselves as this. They're dignified. They want to build a new society, a new future, a new infrastructure. We need to work at the level of international institutions. I had a meeting in Parliament today. That's why I was late here, with an MP, and I'm trying to organize an event in Parliament to inform MPs about these issues of what's happening with children, and for Finland as a government to take action, to do programs on the ground. So I'm not thinking about low-scale stuff. I'm thinking about what can we do as a country. And this is where Sumud's work is extraordinary, which, Syksy, I think you should say something about, because Sumud has really tried to build a whole new framework of how we can do political action with care. And I'd love for you to say something about that.
Well, I like to talk, but I think we should, but since we have 2 minutes, I think we should rather have from Randa.
Yeah, okay. I agree with what Nitin said, that we need to work in the media, first of all, because I just remember one of journalists here that he was talking to, I was asking why we don't cover what is happening in Palestine as much as it needed. And he said that, unfortunately, people do not read what is happening in Palestine anymore because the rank is weak. And then I started and stopped, what the hell is this? This is not an answer that a journalist should give to me. Like, this is our job and this is our responsibility to change the mentality and to write the stories that the people could hear and listen and read. So every one of us has responsibility to talk, has responsibility to share and publish what is happening across the community that they are in. What is happening, I mean, this is how we can help as individual. Then we have to unite the media efforts to make a real impact on the countryside, like recognizing Palestine as a state. We have to do this. And this is happening when academia, media, journalism, activists, they united efforts. So each one of you has his responsibility or her responsibility to do this. And starting by writing and telling, even if you think that you are not a good writer or storyteller, but you are, every one of us is. So this is how we can help now.
Thank you. I would love to continue on discussion. I actually had lots more questions about the book, but I'm afraid I'm out of time. So I would like to thank panelists Heidi, Nitin, Randa, and the audience, and also the remote audience. Thank you.
And we're happy